everybody. So today is Tuesday. That means it's time for Family Movie Night. And this week we are starting my annual Jane Austen Month, where we cover a bunch of fun Jane Austen films. And we've covered a lot of the most popular ones. And so these are going to be a little bit more unknown, a little bit more hidden gems kind of a thing. And today's film is definitely going to be a very interesting one. And there's so much to talk about. I feel a little, they call jumbled about what to talk about first. We're talking about the 1999 version of Mansfield Park. I do feel like this film gets a little too much hate from the Austenites, from the Jane Austen crowd. I think that it takes a very difficult story to make modern and does a pretty good job of adapting it, and they do change things around. They do things, but I think a lot of its changes are a little overblown by some people, and it's not to me as like egregious as far as changing character and tone and everything that it went as the recent Persuasion on Netflix. Plus, I think there's just way more chemistry, way better filmmaking. So it has a lot more to offer as far as that. And I just the actual story has less to work with than than Persuasion. Mansfield Park is just not a book that has aged particularly well. And so I think you kind of have to make changes in order to make it palatable for a modern audience. So I'm a little bit more forgiving of changes they have to make for Mansfield Park than I am for Persuasion. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about some of the strengths, some of the weaknesses, some of the changes, what people don't like, what people do like. And this is a PG-13 film, and there are some darker things, and there are some more grown-up things. And so you will have to decide whether your older children are able to watch this, if it's something you want to watch, but it is PG-13. So there we go about that. So of course, the story of Mansfield Park is about Fanny Price, and Fanny Price is from a very, very large poor family, but her mother grew up in a rich family, but she married beneath her station to a poor man. But she has a lot of children. She decides to send one of her children, Fanny, to her sister to raise Fanny. And so she ends up with the Bertrams, and she gets a sort of a more privileged existence, but she's not on the same level, and she's always treated differently than the children, the actual children of the Bertrams. So you have Tom Jr., Maria, Edmund, and Julia. And she has a great liking for Edmund from a very, very young age. And they basically kind of grow up together and are very, very good friends. And that's part of the thing that makes this story dated, is that the love interest is literally her cousin, but not even just that, because a lot of times in older books, they would call people cousins that were very, very distantly related. That I'd be a second, third cousin, and not the same as like your actual cousin. And but then this is even kind of weirder because it's the person that was basically her brother growing up, that she lived with from the time she was 10. So that's a little strange. And that's why the story, I think, is hard for modern audiences sometimes. So when she's 18, her uncle goes to Antigua to look after his property and his land. That's one of the controversies of the movie, is they bring up the slave trade in Antigua as a major sort of plot point of a sort of a moment of truth for Fanny. And does she want to support her family that is being supported by slaves? And you actually see some fairly graphic drawings and other things, and some scenes of the slave trade and other things like that. So that's brought into the story. It is mentioned in Mansfield Park about the slaves. So it's not like something that's totally left field and Fanny's kind of horror at the slaves, but it's kind of mentioned and then not really worked into the story that much. And so some people don't like that. I feel like you need to modernize the story a little bit. So I don't really have a problem with it. I think it fits pretty well into the story. I can understand why some people are annoyed by the changes of Fanny's character. She is much more like bold in here. She actually, in the she's much more bold. She's less of a fearful, weak character than in the book. I do feel like I wish we weren't so afraid to have introverted, quiet, more still characters. Why every kind of strong female character has to be kind of outspoken and loud and more of a type A kind of personality. I think it's good to have also sort of a little bit more quiet, pensive characters. And we don't see those very, because like that's viewed as not being strong when I still think that it's strong. And they also make some changes to the story. The Henry Crawford and Maria relationship is different. It's a little bit more sexualized, a little more explicit in this than in the book, obviously, for the time it was written. You have a little bit of a different dynamic between Henry and Fanny, where she actually accepts his proposal at a certain time. And then decides against it. And there's also like some other things with the play that get a little bit more sexual than in the book, a little more sensual. And even between Mary and Fanny, there's some like allusions, but nothing like spelled out against PG-13. But I think that most of those changes work pretty well. I'm not a stickler to the book, especially a book that I don't think is perfect. I don't think that it all holds up that well. So I think it makes sense to do modern adaptations and change it. And to me, it wasn't as egregious as the recent Netflix Persuasion as far as changing the character and the themes. And I think the chemistry is way better in here between Frances O'Connor and Johnny Lee Miller. We will be talking about Johnny Lee Miller again in the 2009 Emma in this month's Jane Austen month. I really like him as an actor. He's very likable. He's very sweet. And when he's in love with Mary, it's really hard to watch. And you see Fanny just struggling and struggling. And I kind of wish we got even more time between Fanny and Edmund. But I do really love when he brings her back to help with Tom. And there's a really classic subtle handhold, which is one of my favorite things in romantic movies when you do. And so I do think their chemistry builds pretty effectively through the movie. I also think it's beautifully shot, beautifully made. The costumes are really great. And I think that they handled the play just about as well as you can. I think it's a little bit hard sometimes for us to understand why it would be so scandalous of them doing this play, Lover's Vows. But this is basically in the world of this story, like an NC-17 play. Like it's really, really scandalous. And so it's so shocking for Fanny, and she does not participate, which she does like a little bit in the book, and so that's different. And she's just really shocked, and so that's why I don't feel like they completely change her character. I think there's still Fanny in there, but they do make her a little bit more bold and a little bit more, especially with dealing with her uncle, who tries to force her to marry Henry and make her feel badly for refusing Henry. And so there's all that going on. It's written and directed by Patricia Rozema. And I think that she really has her own unique stamp on this, her own unique voice. And so she's not trying to imitate anybody else. She's trying to do something unique. And I appreciate that. And I think I am more forgiving just because I don't love the book. And so I'm like, okay, change things, because if they'd gone right by the book, I probably, wouldn't have liked it as much. So I kind of feel like this one is underrated. I feel like people make too big a deal of the changes, and they've got really good chemistry. It's very well made. I think it makes interesting choices in the script and in the direction. And if you haven't seen it, I think that you should check it out. If you're a Jane Austen fan, it's at least interesting. They make interesting choices, and it has something to say and a unique perspective So I think it's definitely worth checking out. And let me know what you think if you've seen this. Do you really hate the changes that they made? Do you not like it? I would be curious to know your thoughts. I would be interested to see if they could make a like modern version of Mansfield Park. Take some of the themes about family and betrayal, and how much do we sacrifice for family, of ourselves to keep the family happy. All those themes are in there, and I think that you could take Fanny and make her an interesting modern character. Obviously, you'd have to change Edmund to maybe being a family friend or something like that. Maybe, I don't know. You'd have to change it because it just doesn't. You don't marry your cousins these days. But I think there's something there. So let me know what you think. Please like this video. Please subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. I'll put all my Jane Austen reviews in the playlist in the description. So check that out. Check out the Patreon and merch store. I'd really appreciate it. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all of our social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So check that out. And thanks so much, everybody. We'll talk to you later. Bye.